Today we have my good friend Jason, with whom I traveled the world already. So very good to have you here with us. You're going to talk about something that you just disclosed before we started the recording. Is the subject of 5 books that you are writing at the very same time. And the common theme of those books is indeed the concept of institutional acceleration. So without further ado, the floor is yours. You have a background in economics. You are interested in many different things. I'm sure this will show up in today's talk. So very happy to have you.
Great, thank you, Thibaut. Thank you all for coming. Really good to be here. So, Jason Botts. I'm an evolutionary institutional economist. My main thing I study is innovation, so economics of new technologies. And the story I want to tell today, as Thibaut hinted, today's kind of a strange. It's not a paper. It's not even a book. I'd love it to be just those things. It's actually about 5 books that I'm going through an emotional sort of process of realizing that I can't write 5 books because that's crazy. So I've got to get it down to just one. And this is my first. The theme of this new thing is not actually that. It's going to be called Capitalism Evolving. And the idea is that the world we live in right now, we live basically in global capitalism, market economies. There's all sorts of pressures on that system, political pressures and environmental pressures and technological pressures and the social demographic things, sort of trying to push it in different directions. And my argument is that the next few decades, the main dynamic we're going to see in the world is capitalism. I want to present the way in which I think that's going to happen. Interestingly, this is not a political movement or a social movement or a demographic movement. It's a technological movement. It is driven by new digital technologies, not just by one of them, by all of them. And I'm going to use the phrase, I think, supercluster, where the fundamental way of understanding the technological era we live in right now isn't just, the internet and AI and so on. It's digital supercluster convergence, where we've got this stack of digital technologies that began with transistors back in the 90s and then gave us computers and then gave us networked computers and internet and then on and on and on it went. And about 10 years ago, when I first started actually working with Thibaut, I still am obsessed with blockchain. And the reason that blockchains are interesting is they were our first distributed digital. It's one where suddenly it wasn't just on a desk, it was fundamentally, inherently like. So this is the sort of story I want to tell, is capitalism is evolving because of this digital tech stack. This digital tech stack is going to impact the global economy and society, not through industries, not through markets directly, but through institutions. It's coming. This is how digital supercluster gets into the economy, is by digital upgrade of the institutions. That process is called institutional acceleration. It's this idea that institutions are fundamentally governing rules that organize economies and markets and legal systems and so on. But we are living through the revolution we are living through now. It's been for a while, some decades, but we are right in the middle of it. So we can't see it because we're right in the middle of it. Is this revolution of digital institutional acceleration. I want to explain the theory of that. So I'll concentrate mostly on the theory. That's my main message to get across. But as a sort of way of talking about the other, cut it back to just 3 other books, not the full horror set of 5 of them. But I want to give you some examples of 3 seemingly unrelated things that are actually the same thing. One of them will be the reason I live in Saudi Arabia now. The reason I live there is because Saudi Arabia is one of the most interesting economies in the world right now because of a big public policy program that started about 10 years ago called Vision 2030. Most people know it as they're just throwing $1 trillion at buying every sports team on earth and building cities in the desert. But actually that's cover for what they're really doing, which is complete digital upgrade of the operating system of the Saudi economy. They're rebuilding all that. And I want to present that as institutional leapfrog. It's basically, they're not trying to catch up with institutions' best practice. They're trying to pull them from. Then I want to talk about China. I was just in China for 2 weeks, just recently, studying Chinese innovation system, and we're seeing the same thing in a different path. China's also going through a revolution right now, catching up and accelerating and overtaking some other countries won't name, but they're across the Atlantic. And the logic, I want to just try to develop a theory of what's going on there with the evolution of Chinese innovation system. Same story. Then I want to talk about eco-capital. This is my favorite project I'm working on, which is how to solve the environmental problem, particularly around on private land, of ecological regeneration and restoration of private land, and how you deal with it. And suggest that one of the things that's missing in the world is this new type of capital, essentially a way of creating a capital object around voluntary contributions towards ecological restoration. And the core argument there is this is the evolution of capitalism, not by adding regulations to control systems, but by creating new types of capital in the system. Again, institutional evolution. All right, so that's where we're going. The broad logic of this, I've already written about this before. This is sort of 10 years of work. But the story begins 10 years ago when myself and colleagues, we set up the Blockchain Innovation Hub. This was a crypto blockchain research center. And our core insight that founded that thing back in 2017 was these new digital technologies, particularly blockchain smart contracts. Blockchains are just the next generation, assuming you roughly know what they are. But what was interesting about them to us as a group of economists, particularly institutional economists, was that this was not industrial tech revolution. Most technology revolutions are industrial tech. New cars, new batteries, new plastics, whatever. This was institutional tech. New money, new identity, new ways of doing contracting. That's not a consumer good, that's a coordination infrastructure. So we said, well, the interesting thing about this is the first time we've clearly seen a tech revolution, a digital tech revolution that was working through institutions, not industries, so industrial tech revolution. That means that we have to bring in the economics of institutions to understand this tech. It wasn't productivity changes, it was changes in transactions. In the classic institutional economics, Ronald Coase, Oliver Williamson, Oliver Hart, the sort of sense of if I can lower the costs of transaction, I can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of coordination. And if I can do that, I can get more coordination, I can get more value created through that. So firms, markets, governments, commons, clubs are all economic institutions, so blockchains. It's not five. So this idea that this was sort of a new class of economic coordination institution that was fundamentally like it's decentralized, but it had a lot of the properties. That's where we started, and we sort of how I got to know Thibaut's work was then connecting that to, well, if that's technology working through institutions, what does that then do to competition? How does that work differently? So we sort of converged around dynamic competition understandings of. So that was blockchain, but we weren't interested in blockchain because crypto. We were interested in blockchain because that was the first clear example of. Then along came AI, and it's like, here's another one. Then along came all of the low Earth orbit satellite platforms. And along came all of the Internet of Things, sensors and actuators and other types of ways of connecting the physical world to the world through then along came sort of growth of cloud, and then the growth of, now we're sort of moving slowly into orbital cloud, and then it'll be quantum orbital cloud, and on we go. But those are different technologies, sensors and actuators and data centers and clouds and internets, and then next generation internets and laser, all of that things. They're not separate technologies. They're one big technology. And what that technology is this supercluster of different capabilities that all add up to create digital institutions. And that is the thing that we think is the most interesting thing we think is happening in the world today on the historical timeline. The last time this happened was the 14th century, from sort of feudal economies to the emergence of the very first sort of corporations and rule of law, right here, 700 years ago. But we've gone through these types of institutional revolutions before. We just haven't in recent what is happening. And what is happening is that these institutions are being rebuilt, emerging, sometimes ported, sometimes they're just being lifted up and ported across, other times they're emerging anew. But this is what I mean by institutional acceleration. Mostly institutions don't move. It's industrial technologies that move, and institutional tech just sits there, being stable and forecastable and certain. It started evolving rapidly, and the reason it's evolving rapidly is because of this cluster. It's not because of any one thing in that. It's because the whole cluster has finally come together, and it doesn't really move until all of it fits together. Then it starts to move. So this is kind of, we don't really have a good name for this yet. I'm trying to popularize the idea of second digital age. I'm open to suggestions about that, but the point is, we've gone from an industrial age to a digital. I have been for 60 years. That digital age started late. The first part of the digital age was communication. That was internets and emails and but just messages going backwards and forwards. That's got us a long way with that. But the next digital age, roughly the transition we're going through now, is it pushed down from digital communication, ISPs and so on, into digital coordination. Two similar sounding words, but they're not the same. And the difference is one has agency, the other one doesn't. Humans are definitely the agent. It's not clear. It can be machine, it can be a human-machine hybrid, it can be all sorts of weird things. This whole what is AI discussion we're having now is caught up in that second digital age of these digital objects seem to be behaving agentic. That means we're in a new era. And if they're agentic, that means they're economic agents. But they're also constituting the economic institutions themselves. We've entered into a new type of world. This is what my sort of sharper definition of, what is a digital economy? Digital economy doesn't mean there's a digital sector. It doesn't mean there's computers in the economy. It doesn't mean there's digital jobs. That's first digital age. That's the industrial definition. The true definition of a digital economy is digital institutions. It's digital all the way down. There's no where it bottoms out and suddenly there's humans there at the bottom. It's not. It's digital all the way down. And that's the transition that we are going through. Every sector, every field has been disrupted by this. The law, I'm in economics, we're deeply confused by this because suddenly we're not quite sure what a firm is anymore. We're also not quite sure what institution, but law having the same problem, every field is going through this. What I want to do is, once we sort of get that idea of digital economy means digital institution, what we have now is a new type of economy, which is a computational economy. The economy is now computational. Institutions are digital all the way down. That means economic coordination can be algorithmic all the way down. That means Oracle feeds and data feeds coming into it or surfacing from it or being pulled in by all the IoT stuff or all of the we can have digital data can be interacting with digital agency, and humans will be in that space. Obviously, they're making choices. Most of the choices are still human, but that won't stay like that for long. So what we've got then is a computable economy. And the work that I was doing prior to this was studying the rise of the commons. The thing about a digital economy is, the thing about an industrial economy is the efficient institutions in an industrial economy are governments providing rules, markets providing coordination, and firms providing production, directing resources or holding resources. Everything else is a rounding error or a problem. Public goods and all that other stuff just doesn't really fit very well in this enormously efficient industrial economy institutions. Digital economies, different. Digital economies, because digital economies are fundamentally made of data, information, and data and information is non-rivalrous, non-excludable, push it into other corners, so it's not. But the most efficient institutional way to organize that resource is in a commons. And Elinor Ostrom taught us this. All of the knowledge commons work has taught us this. Open source software has taught us this. We know it theoretically, we know it experimentally, we know it practically, that commons are suddenly very powerful institutions in a digital economy. But we're not talking. But we're talking capitalism. We're talking a market capitalism global system that has now got this new institution that is becoming more efficient or more productive. So the point is, more and more production will move into the common. Again, software. Exhibit A example of that. As more and more of the economy is made of software, more and more move in there. So we've got this institutional drift evolution process going, where it is moving, it is both digitizing, and as it digitizes, commons will start to rise. So second digital age structurally looks different to first digital age. First digital age was platforms. It looks different to industrial age, that was firms, markets, industries, and sectors as the units. All right, so this sort of, the point here is the stack works together. Those are currently different technologies and different companies and different things. But from a evolutionary economic perspective, from that sort of the way global capitalism is evolving, this is come together and is cohering our next thing. On the other side of this, I don't know what survives. Do nation states? What are firms? There's a whole lot of sort of new questions around what type of governing institutions and objects exist over that. But that's not what I want to focus on here. The logic of this is a from 10 years ago, but just the point here is, this is a straightforward economizing argument that these new technologies lower the cost of trust. Where you get efficiencies from. The whole sort of Web3 thing is, what is Web3? Web3 is just taking all of the institutions, money, identity, contracting, infrastructure, registries, property right, turning them into database objects, digitizing those things. So that was what Web3 has been doing so far. Then past 6 years, 3 years, 4 years, depending on how we're counting, we've now got AI, but most importantly, we've got AI agents have into this mix, and they're doing a lot of disruption around I think people are overly focusing on AI as the new thing that has been dropped in. It is the latest thing that has been dropped in, but what it has been dropped into is into this stack of AI, which can now have agency. If it's got agency, it can have identity. If it's got identity, it can make decisions. It can be a counterparty to a contract. If it can be a counterparty to a contract, it can receive payments and money. So it plugs into the stack. Of here is that I think the point I'm making here is that to think of AI as just the accelerant on this, and the sort of the missing piece that gives you knowledge for decision making into this stack of digital institutions around what is it, who is it, what does it hold, what can it do, what is it limited from doing, and so on. All of the things that sort of Web3 provided us. So I'm very much a maximalist around the blockchains. Web3 converges with AI to create. All right, but that's the part one of this talk. And I'll quickly sort of run through some examples. But what this gives us is the institutional acceleration thesis is digital technologies, which began with transistors back in the 90s, and then computers and the internet and all the way through. Gives us the supercluster thesis. This is not 17 different technologies. This is one technological stack that is stacked industrially in as commodities, but from an institutional perspective, they are a stack. That stack, if there's any parts of it that are not digital, the whole thing is not digital. But once you've got identity, money, contracting, registries, oracles, bridges, just all the way through to knowledge and decision making. Once you've got that full stack, then it shifts. This isn't a gradual process. This is a step change. It suddenly becomes, now you have a digital. And I think that's the world we're in right now. We're going through that transition. Why it's so confusing. But once we hit that, now innovation applies to institutions, not just now institutions can start to accelerate. As those institutions start to accelerate, we're going to see the next few decades are going to be marked by institutional acceleration, not industrial. It's going to feel weird because some things that previously we thought of as super hard problems are just going to get resolved very quickly, and new problems are going to emerge. But what that looks like is computable. That computable economy is the one we're entering into now. We've never had one before. We've had parts of the economies were computable. They were the massive profit sector parts or the high productivity parts, but we're pushing that wider. So that's what digital does. I think of this, my mental model for this is an operating system upgrade of, no one chose it. We didn't decide to do this, it emerged. There's no stopping it. It's happened. It's equally scary and exciting. There's reasons to be worried about this because this is going to accelerate. There's reasons to be excited about this because this is going to accelerate. But this is the disruption that we are going through now. It is not happening inside countries. This is why it can't be. It's happening on the internet. So you can kind of align with it, you can fight it, but that's not a political decision. So capitalism evolving is the thing we're going through now. This has happened before, but just the last time it happened was pretty much the 14th century with the emergence of joint stock companies and the end of feudalism. The next sort of kind of time it happened was the late 19th century with multinational corporations and nation-state power and sort of a lot of transitions to modern industrial economies. But it's happening again. And like last time, it was a historical force. No one led it. It wasn't a company. Right. Let me talk you through 3 quick examples. I'm short here, just to illustrate this point. Saudi Vision 2030. If you don't know about it, it's interesting. What it is Saudi Arabia, largest economy in the Middle East, 2016 got a new king. The new king appointed his son and said, we need to fix Saudi Arabia, and we need to pivot away from oil. And Vision 2030 was a set of policies that were developed to do that. We're 11 years into it now. It seems to be working. And I say that cautiously. There's been a lot of critique of it, rightfully so. There's been a lot of spectacular waste of bazillions of dollars. They've built cities in the desert that haven't quite worked. However, there's cities in the desert that are pivoting into data centers now, which might have been the play all along. Careful to who I'm speaking to here, but there's some incredible deep investments in building a new type of economy. This isn't industrial planning. They tried that absolutely failed 10 times in a row. 10 5-year plans in a row just didn't work. What this is market reform. What they've done is they've gone back and they've said, we have an opportunity, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to completely digitize all our institutions. And they've gone through and done it. That's the bit you can't see. You see they bought this sports club, this soccer club, or they hosting the whatever, or the big giga projects are the things you see on the surface. But mostly those things are about channeling the cultural change that needs to happen in order for this institutional change. So look, this came from a McKinsey report, of all things. McKinsey denied this, but I'm pretty sure that's where it came from. But the basic plan is how do you diversify an economy that is perfectly wealthy? Like they've got the cheapest oil forever. They don't need to do this, but the decision was if they don't do it, gradually the economy just becomes, it doesn't grow, it doesn't become vested. So they're trying to do all of that. The shift is this from a rent-based economy, and they're not the only economy in the world that has this structure. Pretty much all the Middle East economies. Dubai is successfully also pulling this move off. Just Dubai didn't have that much oil to begin. But this shift from how do you go from a wealthy but rent-based economy, and what is a rent-based economy? It's just one that doesn't have much economic dynamism, which means that markets don't need to work very well. Saudi is different from all of the other, from Iran and Venezuela and Libya and all of the other oil countries. It's the only one that's capitalist. The other ones are all socialist. This is the only capital, and this is why it is interesting that Saudi capitalism has decided to reinvent capital because they can. They're sitting with $1 trillion of sovereign wealth fund that they can spend on this, and how they're spending it is by rebuilding all of the fundamental institutions of capitalism by just digitizing the whole lot. It's incredible. If you've ever been there, it's one of the most digital economies in the world right now. Just everything works through phones in a sort of Singaporean, Dubaian sort of sense. You never need to interact with. But the implication of that is that now they're in a position to push market dynamics into this. I've just finished writing a book on this. I haven't got a publisher yet, but exploring this whole logic of the Middle East is reinventing capitalism, and what is interesting about it is it's reinventing it in a way that is exactly this institutional acceleration thesis, driving tech into the institutions of a market economy and lowering the costs of economic dynamics. So again, we'll see how this plays out, but this is still early. But what it kind of looks like is, this is my sort of thesis of how the Saudi economy is doing this process. And it's not just them. Oman's doing it, the sort of Egypt was trying to do it, but just basically most of the economies in the Middle East are going through this process right now because they see the end of oil. They see that they can't live like that forever. So they've got big war chests that they can into doing this. But what it looks like is step one, digitize all the institutions. Step two, get markets working a lot better, including capital markets and labor markets and deep market reform. That then enables firms to come in. The main problem with Middle East economies is there's zero entrepreneurship in them because the incentives are so weak. So you enable them to do that. You've got the PIF Sovereign Wealth Fund is this huge country-sized venture capital fund that is basically funding all of this. And the idea is, and then it becomes, and that's where new industries will emerge from. Not industrial planning, just basically creating the market conditions for entrepreneurship to thrive, and then just to say, look, our venture fund will preferentially support these things, but it's a venture-funded direction, not an industrial planning direction. Key, crucially important distinction to. The idea is that will drive the prosperity of that region going forward. So what's interesting, the next thing I'll point out is what's interesting is they're doing that exactly at the same time Europe and America are struggling with exactly the same process of their regulatory cost, or sort of industries just finding it really hard to do frontier innovation, particularly in things like space construction or the new industries that, you know, if you try and build heavy launch space capabilities here, I'm assuming that would be extreme. There it's pretty, they're lowering the cost of building those sort of next generation industries, but they're not doing it as industrial planning or industrial lead. It's just basically dramatically lowering the costs of new firms starting up in those sectors. So we'll see whether it works. I'm not wanting to oversell this, but my observation is just that we're observing that's happening there. Examples of this, just to be quite concrete, and this is the stuff that, you know, when the Economist or the Financial Times are writing about Saudi Vision 2030, they're not writing about this, but these are the main changes that have happened. Digital identity and property registries have been top to bottom reformed. They're shifting to the way government procurement programs work, that they've completely rebuilt all of that. Sort of rule-based, basically algorithmic-driven things rather than, they don't really have tax. They're blessed people, they don't really have tax, which means that they can build their own tax systems without this legacy of all sorts of mistakes in the past. So they're constructing new tax systems now as part of the pivot away from oil rents. But they're building tax systems from zero. So they're actually building them in a much more logical, designed by economists, not designed. A lot of the real-time payment systems there are incredibly efficient. They're at the frontiers of building new court systems, where those court systems will be designed where judges are robots from the start. Again, this is sort of somewhat speculative in how they're doing it, but they're building that with this in mind. And because the main thing that they're obsessed with is to create a regulatory and institutional infrastructure that is attractive to foreign capital. Like, they've got plenty of capital there themselves, but what success looks like is foreign capital comes into Saudi Arabia. They have to build very strong investor protection laws, very strong corporate governance, and very cheap ways of administering all of those things. So you're just seeing a lot of some of the most experimental computational law is actually happening in the Middle East because it can, because there's an appetite for it. They're not fighting it. They want it. So that sort of shift is what is happening there. China's also evolving as well in its institutions, and the main way it's evolving in its institutions is that its innovation system is pivoting very, very hard to local cluster-based, low IP, very fast experimentation and scaling up at the city level. Any of you who have been to China will have experienced this. That's the most remarkable thing about Chinese innovation, how fast it moves. No one is competing with it. But the reason that is happening is just deep integration of digital institutions system. Another example, the third example I'll give is something that seems perhaps strange and unusual is some work that myself and Ali Rennie and a few others have been doing around what we're calling eco-capital. And what this is about is dealing with the environmental crisis, and particularly the crisis of sustainability. And one of the fundamental flaws of market capitalism is externalities, particularly environmental, especially at the global level. Like, capitalism is not designed for that, it was never designed for that, it was always going to be a problem. And the way in which capitalism in the 20th century evolved to deal with that was environmental law. You recognize the externalities, pollution and other types of degradation of ecosystems. You ask the ecologists what good would look like. Then you say, all right, firms, here's the new constraints that you. So you basically, you use regulation and legislation to constrain firms. So it's firms, markets, governments. Within all of that, you use one to constrain the other. That's modern environmental capitalism. Problem is it doesn't really work. It's enormously costly, and with each passing day it works less and less, and at some point you just pick up and you move to another jurisdiction, or the latest one is you move off the planet. You keep running away from it. You're always incentivized to run away from it. And there's no flaw there. It couldn't be any other way. So our question is, well, how do you evolve capitalism to endogenize that, the environmental externality? And what we came up with is a theory we're calling contribution systems or eco-capital. But a contribution system is thousands of years we've had contribution systems. Groups of people, friends, family, community will gather together to do something. We normally think of those things as clubs or societies or civil society, but they're not part of capitalism. There's no property rights there. There's no market prices. There's no exchange of property rights. It's just a separate thing. So, and you use that to solve public goods problems, like how do we provide all of the things that capitalism isn't providing. So the thing about these new digital technologies, particularly blockchains and smart contracts and digital ID, and sensors and satellites, is they're registries. They're ways of observing something happened and recording a fact, someone did something, and they did it on this day, and we can confirm that they did it. So that's sort of creating facts about events, of people doing things. We can start to rebuild institutions around that. Now, there's no prices in this. There's no market exchange. So we've been developing this idea of contribution systems as a new theoretical framework for thinking about voluntary collective action at a sort of civil society level. And one of the tasks that we were particularly looking at was land restoration, particularly on private land. On public land, that's easy, that's national parks. But on private land, how do you get volunteers to voluntarily contribute to cleaning waterways or building beaver dams or removing wilding pines or just sort of that type of thing? So this was the challenge we've been looking at. And first step is, well, just step one, record who did it. If someone turned up and did some voluntary work on just pulling out weeds or clearing waterways, just make that a fact and write that fact to a ledger. We'll figure out later how to value that later on, but just this idea that this digital tech stack that we've got can also be used for creating new types of facts. All right, so what happens if we can build those facts? Well, interestingly, they become inputs into capital. And this is our observation. Is that if you think, well, what is capital? Capital in capitalism. Well, what is capital? Capital is just a bunch of facts that are recorded by, usually the banking system does a fair bit of work around who, so capital means two things. It means factor of production, productive resource, and that's the standard definition. But the original 14th century definition of capital is just, it's a money contribution to a project. And that was the book entry. I contributed this money, this capital, to this joint venture, and we'll sail the seas and try and bring some spices back or something like that. The idea of capital only exists in capitalism. That was the original idea. That what we meant by that was a book entry record that says you made a contribution to a joint project. And then next step is wrap a firm around an organization, create a legal object within that as ownership of this capital, and that capital is recorded as a book entry, so I can tell when it moves, and I can tell when it's exchanged. And again, we've got lots of institutions, schools, registries, exchanges, investment banks. They make capital. They provide the institutions for that. We can do that again. We can do that with all sorts of things now, because these satellite oracles, these sensors, these blockchains, these registries, these AI sort of devices, keeping track of that. It's just doing what these things. But we can do it over. We can now start to sort of create new types of capital. I don't know what they're worth yet. But again, the original capital didn't have value until it figured out how to create value down the line with various sorts of exchanges. But the point to make here, and I'm skipping through a whole talk in 30 seconds, but two ways of dealing with the problems of capitalism. One is regulate it, constrain it, try and sort of socialize it. That's the 20th century model of how to deal with environmental externalities or the problems of capitalism. Second thing is more capital. The problem is we just didn't have enough capital in capitalism, and we need to expand it well beyond industrial capital out to ecological. Why would you do that? Because the whole point of capital in capitalism is high-powered incentives. It creates high-powered incentives to invest, to create value for consumers. Sometimes that goes astray, but the basic logic of high-powered institutional incentives to do a thing that the humans want. In this case, we want healthy environments. We want healthy global environments. So we need to create a new type of capital. And it's just, the starting point is sort of thinking that capital isn't just a resource that is held by someone, and if it's held by you, it's not held by someone else. It's true. Capital definitely has that property, but it is also financially generative. And your evidence for that is the simple fact that you can use it as collateral. Take capital, which is generative, it can produce cars, but I can collateralize that capital asset, my car factory, to create a loan to create some new capital. This is how capital reproduces. Again, that's Marx that first pointed that out, right? So this isn't a left-right story. This is just saying this is always what capital has been. But we need to figure out ways of capitalizing ecology. And the first step is when someone does some work that creates ecological value, we need to create a record of that. They did that. And we're not paying them for it, we're not enabling them to sell it, we're just saying there's a record that they did that. If, down the line, that ecosystem has higher value because of that, we need to be able to, now we've got a way to trace it back and say who contributed to that. We do this with citations in academic work. It's not an unfamiliar concept. A lot of effort into tracking who had intellectual ideas and what they led to and be able to trace them back. So it's the same sort of logical story here. But what that then does is it gives us a new type of capital. We've been experimenting with this. Yeah, right. So I'll finish up right there. This is an experiment. We've been doing this with a group called Regen Marketplace, and these two here, they're the owners of Planet, which is the CubeSat satellite company. They've volunteered one of their land that they've got in Northern California for us to experiment with that. The land management there is beaver dams, and we record that. But the point here is tech. Just use digital tech to record citizen voluntary contributions to ecological restoration on private land. And no idea what the worth of this. The idea is we've now got a way of measuring, tracing this back to who helped contribute to capitalizing. So this is the logic. Digital institutions in this context of the evolution of capitalism are going to create a new type of economy. This economy is going to be not going to look like industrial economies. And I think in some surprising ways, in the direction innovation is going to look different. We're seeing economic growth and development look very different. We're seeing some of the solutions to some of the biggest problems in the world will start to look different if it goes down this path. But the standard capitalism created problems, we fix it by putting it back in a box to fix those problems, I think is not where this goes because of the digital supercluster thesis. Digital means institutions, institutions enable innovation, and innovation means dynamic. That's where we are now. So I'll stop there, sorry I've gone way over time, but that's the thesis.
Thank you so much.